Each year, Earth Overshoot Day marks the date when we have used all the biological resources that the planet can renew during the entire year. It's determined by the Global Footprint Network, and it's been in the negative since 1971. In 2024, that date will be July 25th. With that statistic alone, it's really easy to understand why so many people are experiencing large level of eco-anxiety. I have to admit that in my personal life, but also as a psychotherapist, this is a topic that I often avoid. It's there in the back of my head, but I really don't like looking at it because it's kind of scary. Eco-anxiety, also known as climate anxiety, is a worry about current and future harm to the environment caused by human activity and climate change. And while it can manifest in symptoms that are quite similar to general anxiety, like stress, bodily symptoms of unrest or nervousness, bad sleep, overthinking, focusing on the negative, fear, helplessness, avoidance, or even like substance use or depression, it differs on one very important point. Eco-anxiety operates on such a large system that most people feel completely helpless when they start to really think about it. What I mean is, if I have social anxiety, for example, I can take concrete steps to reduce my stress. But with eco-anxiety, as we're going to talk more later, the situation feels a lot less tangible. And the actions of other people, and mostly of big corporations and people in power, have a lot of impact on our personal life, potentially making us feel very small and unimportant. Because as soon as we start to learn a little bit about the environment, it becomes quite clear that individual actions, while important, don't have a large impact on our systems and on the problem. Even right now, as more and more people are aware of the environment and want to make a change, many of the solutions that are offered to us are small individual actions, and a lot of them are just greenwashing. Greenwashing is generally defined as a deceptive marketing practice that makes companies exaggerate or falsely claim their products or services are environmentally friendly. It can mislead customers who are looking to make sustainable choices, undermining genuine environmental efforts. Think about the craze about plastic straws that happened a few years ago. Like, of course, plastic straws are made of plastic and they're used just once and then discarded, and they do impact the planet a little bit. But the response to plastic straws was much more emotional than it was logical. Mostly because we all saw that one video of the turtle with the plastic straw stuck in its nose. I'm not saying that it's not important. I'm just saying that because of that video, plastic straws became the emblem, in my head at least, of personal greenwashing tactics. The war against plastic straws became something tangible, emotional, relatively simple to implement so that people could feel better about the environment and their part in promoting change. And they could do that without having to change their life too much or at all, you know? And because people reacted this way, all of the media started pushing this message. Partly because people clicked on it, and medias love it when we click on their stuff, but also because they could start selling other merchandise, like reusable straws. You know, it's important to know that most websites that included anti-straws rhetoric also featured a store or a link to a store that sold reusable straws. Even National Geographic started to push the sale of metal straws at the time. Anyway, that's just one small example of greenwashing, but even recycling, which is mostly perceived as a good method to reduce waste, is very limited by contamination, by the economic viability of recycling certain materials, and the overall efficiency of the unique recycling system that exists in the city where you live. This reality the fact that we can barely trust the actions that are offered to us can be very well illustrated by the first model that I want to introduce in this video. Noel Birch's 4 stages of competence model. As the title mentions, the model suggests that there are 4 stages that a person goes through when they learn about something new. There is unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and unconscious competence. In the first stage, unconscious incompetence, a person just doesn't really know something. So for example, if I don't know how to knit, I've never touched knitting needles in my life, I have no idea how it works, and I have these preconceptions about it, and I really just don't know what I don't know about it. The second stage is the conscious incompetence. This is when someone starts getting information about a topic only to understand how little they know about the topic. So when I start knitting, maybe the first day I'm like, oh, this is really easy, I can do this. And then the more I progress through the skill, the more I understand that I don't know anything and there's more to the learning curve that I previously thought. So this stage can feel quite overwhelming because the more you discover about a skill, the more intensely you realize that you don't know anything about the skill. And then at stage 3 and 4, people start owning the skill. So I become quite good at knitting in stage 3, but I still really need to be careful not to make mistakes. And I need to be like pretty conscious of what I'm doing. And in stage 4, I become unconsciously competent. So I can just sort of like pick my needles and knit without really thinking about it while watching a TV show or whatever. So when you apply the model to something as small as knitting, it's quite straightforward, right? The issue with eco-anxiety is that the problem is so vast and there's so much misleading and false information out there that we can get stuck in that second stage, the conscious incompetence stage, forever or for like a really long time. You know, that stage where the more you learn about something, the more you realize that you don't know anything about that thing and how vast and complex and overwhelming it is to get a good grasp on this issue. Like with plastic straws, reusable grocery bags, or learning how much recycling is a scam, the more you learn and the more frustrating it becomes. And one of the solutions that people have to reduce their eco-anxiety, because that second stage is so uncomfortable, is just to take a step back and to go back into the first stage, unconscious incompetence. Going back to the first stage allows us to keep things light and to not worry too much instead of constantly agonizing about the depth of the issue. And all those people preferring to stay in the first stage or taking a step back to the first stage can get very frustrating for those of us who are trying to take actions and to make changes. And this is where the second psychology model I wanted to discuss today comes in and muddle things even more. This is the systemic model. The systemic model, as its name points out, is the model that reminds us that we live in various systems of different sizes. There are smaller systems called microsystems on which we have much more control. For example, in your own household, you might make an effort to recycle or to use biodegradable cleaning products. But in a medium system, a mesosystem, like your neighborhood or your city, they might undo some of your effort by using pesticides in fields, or maybe public transport is not offered, or there aren't any good bike lanes in your city. And ultimately, in large systems, the macro systems, the safety of the planet might just not be a priority for all of our elected leaders. And maybe the big companies that are somewhat ruling the world right now may be much more interested in making profits and hoarding goods and money than to save our planet. And unfortunately, the bigger you go in a system, the hardest it is to change it. So making changes in your own life is quite simple. You just have to make the decisions and talk to people next to you. But making changes, on a government level or on a planet level is really, really challenging. So the first model is telling us that Learning about being greener can be difficult. And the second is telling us that these large systems in place try to prevent us from making significant changes. I am very aware that I'm not painting a very positive portrait right now. Fortunately, if we look at the models again, we can find a little bit of comfort and maybe some solutions. Now, unfortunately, I have to say that the bias of my video is that we are not going to find solutions to saving the environment right now. Solutions to truly make a difference on the environment should probably be a whole other video made by someone who has a very different background than mine. So I'm going to focus on how to reduce your eco-anxiety without going back to that first stage and pretending like it does not exist. So first, you can look back at the first model and remind yourself that feeling overwhelmed and incompetent is a normal and regular part of learning something new. So when you ultimately reach that phase in the conscious incompetent phase, where you are trying to learn about the environment and you get overwhelmed, you can stop a little bit and have a ton of self-compassion and take a break and forgive yourself for not being perfect right away. And it's not a magical solution, but hopefully by remembering that this feeling of being overwhelmed is a normal process of learning a new thing, you can, be a little bit kinder with yourself and hopefully resist the urge of going back to stage one, unconscious incompetence. Then with the systemic approach, you can learn to focus your efforts and your energy on the things that you have control over. That often starts with focusing on your own life instead of being angry at everyone else. By remembering the importance of systems, you can direct your anger at the right place. So instead of being angry at your coworkers for using plastic bottles for their water, you can reserve all your energy and your anger for Nestle, for creating and promoting these bottles and slowly killing our planets for their profit. Now it's a lot easier to be angry at your colleagues because you can have a direct reaction from them. But ultimately, it's much more useful to keep your anger for the right places, even if the call to action for being angry at Nestle is a lot harder than the call to action to just shame or yell at your colleagues. And with the systemic approach, you can still make changes in different systems, right? It would probably still feel good at your place of work to pass a policy about reusable plastic water bottles and, changing the internal values of your organization. It won't have a massive impact on the planet, but you have some control over that system, and it would still feel kind of good as long as it's done in an intelligent way and not just charging ahead in a greenwashing way like sometimes we tend to do. And on the larger systems, I'm not fully sure what we can do against companies like Nestle, but if you have ideas, write them in the comments and call me, I don't know, and we'll do something. Ultimately, we have to remember that living in a bunch of systems of different sizes doesn't make it an either or situation. I hear that all the time. Something like, all the pollutions come from big companies, so who cares what I do? And while the premise, the first part of that statement is true, making it equating with nobody cares what I do is just not true. It's a logical fallacy called a false dichotomy, like an either or situation. Yes, most of the populations come from big companies, and what we do is important. It's important for the environment a little bit. It's important to influence our friends and our economy and hopefully our leaders. And most importantly of all of it, it's important for our own mental health, because if our values is to be green and to care for the environment, living according to our own values is really good. There's something very soothing about These are my values, and these are the actions that I personally take to be aligned with my values. It's not perfect. It does not change the macro systems the way that we want, but it can be quite soothing to make those small decisions for ourselves. Just be careful to not go on the complete opposite of the systemic model and the spectrum, and to just completely isolate yourself in your microsystem and forget to do advocacy work. And finally, you can remember, because it is very true, that large changes are going to have a much bigger impact on our planet than our own little changes that we can do at home. You do not need to be perfect and to cut everything from your life just to be greener. If that's what you want and these are your values, that's perfect. But there's no reason to make you completely miserable to cut every single bit of plastic out of your life, because ultimately we do need larger systems to make a real change and a real impact to our environment. Ultimately, if 50% of the population is being, 30% better at being eco-friendly, is much more powerful than, just 1% of the population who is capable of being 100% better. That's the tips that I have for today to continue to be eco-friendly while not giving ourselves a burnout and a depression while looking at the bigger picture. I hope this was useful and that you've learned something new. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up on the video and let me know in the comment which one is your favorite way to be eco-friendly. Ciao!